Hi, welcome to our fourth and final session of our Power Planning series. I am Heather Christie, and I'm here with Mark Sanborn. We're going to be completing this Power Planning series today by discussing the 4 results principles and helping you to implement these principles in your daily routine. Last session, we discussed getting clarity on what you want and creating your plan to achieve it. If you didn't catch that session or the first 2 sessions, please go back and listen. And as always, you'll get the most value from these sessions if you complete those exercises. Mark, over to you.
Well, here's a bonus idea to start this session off. I think it's important, as you look at the overall use of your time, to realize that there are 3 kinds of books. A few books are worth reading. Many books are worth skimming. And perhaps most books are worth skipping. I think the most important skill you can develop as a learner and a reader is the discernment to know which books fall into which categories. I've used a rule that served me well over time, and that is if in the first 50 pages I'm not getting a good return on my reading investment, I either abandon the book or I simply skim to the end. Sometimes that's a little painful if you've invested a significant amount of money in a book to either abandon it or skim it. But when you think about the value of your time and how it could be deployed to do better, more useful things, you'll realize that you don't want to get locked into what economists call a sunk cost theory, which simply says just because you've already spent money you can't recover, don't let it continue to cause you to invest additional time, money, or resources that you can't recover. So know the books to read, the books to skim, and the books to skip. With that bonus idea, we're going to talk about those 4 results principles that you mentioned earlier, Heather, and they are planning, accountability, reflection, and celebration. Now, obviously, planning is an obvious one, but it's not enough unless you go to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th principles of accountability, reflection, and celebration. So, Heather, back to you to talk about effective planning.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, too, for your bonus idea. I'd love to start with a bonus idea, too, and I hadn't planned this, but you made me think of it. And that is the 80-20 reading rule that I use when I read. And here's how it goes. Whatever time you have set aside to read, assuming that you have one of those books that you really should be applying and learning, consider taking 80% of your time of reading to actually just read and mark up, highlight, and take 20% of your time to then go back and review what action steps will I take from what I just read. And it's a whole different way of reading, and it's amazing when you go back and you look through the notes that you made or the areas you highlighted and you read for a second time with the thought of application, how much that can change for you, your experience of that book. So there's my bonus idea for the day, the 80-20 reading rule. Let's move on to the first results principle is planning. And we talked a lot about this in our 3rd podcast series. We talked about some real practical tips about planning. And I want to get down to we're going to start with a high level view and down to more specifics on what you actually do with this plan. From a very high level perspective, we talked about, how to create that plan and do your daily planning the night before. But I want to take you up to a higher level view where you look at your plan, starting with your strategic plan. So when we do planning, we usually start off on the strategic side of things, and we like to look 3 years out. Now, I know that it used to be that we looked 10 years out for a strategic plan. And what I'd suggest to you is that things are happening and changing so quickly these days, it's really difficult to look out much more than 3 years and have any sort of reality to the plans that you're creating. So think about a 3-year strategic plan. These are the things that I want to have present in my life and my business 3 years from now. From there, you go down to your annual plan. So what would I need to do by the end of this year in order to stay on track with my strategic 3-year plan? Once you have your annual plan and you've got some clarity, I like to do my top 3 results that I'm after, business and personal. Top 3 business, top 3 personal. Once I've got clarity on that for the year, now it's much easier for me to say, what do I need to accomplish by the end of this quarter? So wherever you are when you're listening to this podcast series, think about what you need to accomplish by the end of this quarter to stay on track with your annual plan. And then, of course, you break it down monthly. What do I need to do by the end of this month to stay on track with my quarterly plan? As you can see, we're just breaking it down in smaller and smaller increments. So what ultimately may have seemed like such a big goal is actually much more feasible when you break it down ultimately to weekly and then to daily. So when you get to the daily goal that you are after, what do I need to do today? That's more of an action plan. That's an activity. What activities do I need to do in order to achieve my weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual goals? That's just an overview of the process that we use. We talked last time about time blocking. And again, I just want to reiterate, it is one of the top things that you could possibly do to improve and really get productivity that you haven't had before. Now, the plan is the first part. It's really good to get that on paper, but I do know that there are many people out there who are really good at writing that plan and getting it on paper and thinking it through and analyzing it to the point where their plan is beautiful. But now then, what do you have to do with accountability, Mark?
Well, I'm going to talk about accountability, but I do want to make one idea reference to what you just said, and that is, for me, where I probably push back, at least subconsciously, against long-term planning, and where I think many others do, is they say, hey, a year from now, I don't know what's going to be happening. Well, that's true. None of us can predict the future. But really, the benefit, the purpose of long-term planning is so that you can determine a year from now what you want to make happen. And if you don't have that long-term plan, everything you do is going to be a knee-jerk reaction to current demands. So it's not about what might happen, and sometimes what does happen in the intervening months requires an adjustment, but we've alluded to that many times. It's about what you can make happen in a year so that at the end of the year, you'll feel good about what you've done. Accountability is the discipline piece that really requires two things. First, your own accountability, to be accountable to yourself. And that is to take responsibility not just for the inputs, but for the outputs. In other words, not just for taking action, but for creating results. I think sometimes we abdicate our own responsibility when we only talk about accountability as something that someone else creates for us or that we create for someone else. As an adult, you are accountable. You're accountable to yourself. You're accountable to your clients, your colleagues, your spouse, your kids, your community. So I don't want to make it sound like you've really got to have an accountability partner if you're going to be successful. An accountability partner can really help. That can be a tremendous benefit. But don't skip over the accountability that you have to yourself as a mature adult to follow through on the plans that you make and the commitments that you decide on committing to. Now, when it comes to accountability for others or from others, that can obviously be the people on your team. More often than not, the best way to become accountable at work is to make sure that you review and follow up on what your team members plan and accomplish, and that they do the same for you, that they return the benefit. I think probably where accountability gets off the tracks was brought home to me by Dr. Henry Cloud, who I've had the opportunity to meet and speak on several programs with. A great guy, writes great books, and is just full of a lot of good ideas. But he said accountability is often thought of as something like this. You have a friend who says he wants to exercise and lose weight. And the way he's determined to do that is to run every morning at 7 o'clock. Henry said that the way most people approach accountability is they think they should call mid-morning and say, did you do your run today? Or maybe at the end of the week, they should check in by email and say, how many days did you run? And while that is a form of accountability, it's a very anemic, a very weak form. He said real accountability is when you show up at your friend's house at 6:55 with your running shoes on, you knock on the door and you say, let's go. And I've always loved that illustration because to me, it's not about asking people if they've accomplished what they set to do. It's about engaging people to help them do it. Now, admittedly, Heather, we don't have a lot of friends that are going to put their running shoes on and show up at our house every morning, but the principle still holds. Who are those people who won't just look at creating accountability as kind of an inconvenience, ask you a superficial question or two, and then trust that what you said is even true? You need somebody that's involved enough with you, your business, or your life, whether that's a mentor, whether that's a professional coach, whether that's a consultant, whether that's a friend, somebody who will actively engage you to help you be accountable, not just to yourself, but to the others and the commitments you've made.
I think The accountability, you're right, is just such a critical part. And it does start with each one of us. It's about taking that personal responsibility for accountability. And I don't know, Mark, if you've ever suffered what I've suffered with my own accountability, which is sometimes I just don't feel like doing it. Sometimes I just am in that space where I will put the biggest, most important thing off, and I'll find every other thing to do before I get to that thing. And so if you're like me and you've ever been through that, I just want to have you, go through a couple of questions for yourself that maybe can help pull you back into that commitment for accountability. First is to just have an awareness. When you're putting something off, don't allow yourself to go into that space of denial and pretend like you're just really busy with those other things. Denial, best I've heard for a definition of denial, is it's an acronym that stands for don't even notice I am lying. So you might want to write that one down. Don't get into denial. If you're not doing what you need to be doing, get yourself into at least a place of awareness and ask yourself the question, why? Why am I not doing what needs to be done? And I would suggest you go a little bit further and just check on your thinking. Am I really tied to the vision for what will happen when I create these results? Do I have enough desire? Go back to session 1. We talked about Earl Nightingale's definition of success, the progressive realization of a worthy goal. Go back to your goal that you're after. Get familiar with the vision for what that creates for you. Is it worthy of your time, effort, and energy? If the answer is no, you're just not there, you don't have the desire, you've got to really examine that goal. Is it still appropriate? Is it the right goal for you? If it is, then you have to just look at your actions and say, okay, why am I not taking action? And sometimes in order to build your belief about accomplishing that goal, you just have to get into action. So again, if that means you've got to find some additional support, you need someone to put their running shoes on with you, even if that's figuratively or theoretically, get into action because action will help you build your belief to go after the result that you're after.
Well, it's that old saying, and I think I said it earlier in one of the sessions, that discipline is the ability to do what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like doing it. People need to know there's a big difference between feeling like doing something and being able to do something. And as I said in session 3, in Morita therapy, they say, what needs to be done next? Do it. You don't have to feel good about it. You don't have to have warm, fuzzy puppy dog feelings. You just need to do it.
And once you do it, you might get those warm puppy dog feelings. You'd be so proud of yourself. I want to share a system that a colleague of mine and I came up with. Ian McFarland is my colleague out of Madison, Wisconsin. We came up with this process called VCAR. That's an acronym. I'm going to give you the letters and you can fill in the blanks on this. It's V as in variance, C as in cause, A as in action, A as in accountability, R as in reforecast. And I'm just going to run you through quickly what this VCAR methodology is. We've used this with many clients. And when you create this kind of methodology for you as a practice, you can use it in literally every area of your life. So, of course, it's primarily a business function, but again, you can use it everywhere. So first of all, variance. This is a methodology for reflecting, okay? When you're in reflection mode, I want you to think about this. Every single month that you are working your action plan, if you're reviewing on a monthly basis to check your results, don't wait for the quarter to go by, or God forbid, don't wait for the year to go by before you check back and say, hey, how did we do on our plan? I like a monthly VCAR. Number 1, check your variance. What that means is, where are your results off? I said we were going to do this by the end of this month. Maybe we've exceeded our goal. I want to know about that if we have, because I want to look into it. But maybe we haven't hit our goal. If there's a material variance, so if you're significantly off the mark in what you projected, we want to go back and let's just identify where do we have the variances. That's part 1. Part 2 then is to say, okay, we have identified a few different material variances from what we've projected. What is the cause for those variances? And again, positive or negative. What did we do really well? Where did we excel and exceed? I want to know what the cause is and dig deep. I don't just want the surface level, oh, we ended up doing better because we just had more calls come in. No, go deeper and find out what was happening there. If you're off the mark, what caused you being off the mark? And I want you to get very specific. Get down to the place of, did it have to do with not having the right action plan? Did we not do the activities? Did we do the activities and not get the results? Was it a lack of accountability? really get specific on what is the cause. Step number 3, what actions do we need to take to get us back on track to still hit our goals that we've set out for ourselves, assuming those goals are the right goals? So, does it require a new action plan for the month? Do you need to step up your activity to be able to hit these results? Do you need to step up your accountability to hit these results? Or if your plan's not working, do you need to shift the plan in some way? And of course, you need to test and measure everything you can so that you can really identify what's not working. The 4th part of this formula is accountability. Once you have that action plan in place, who's going to be accountable for making sure that that action plan is brought ultimately to the end, to the result that you're after? Anytime I have a client who says, oh, we've got 2 people responsible for this particular activity, I always like to ask for just one person who is ultimately the one who's going to be accountable to see that this action has taken place. And then the last part of it is the reforecast. And this is a really important piece that most companies that I meet with are not already doing. And that is, do you need to change your original forecast? Now, this is an important question, specifically even getting down to the level of cash flow, which is really the engine in the business, the oil in the engine of your machine, of your business. If you missed the mark substantially, we need to know from a business perspective, do we need to change our forecast for year end? Do we need to add in additional products or services? Do we need to come up with a whole new strategic plan for the year to be able to hit the numbers that we've already committed to from a projection perspective? So make sure you go back and you look at all of those things. Most people will gain experience from going through a month and working really hard. But the question is, are you in a place of reflection where you actually gain the insight from what you've done in that prior month? Of course, once you've done all that, hopefully you're going to be celebrating some wins, which is our 3rd principle. Mark, you want to talk about celebrating wins?
Well, I know people that celebrate even when they don't get it done. That's their problem. They celebrate first before they plan or create accountability or reflect or anything else. But I digress. Let's talk about celebrating. I think celebrating is one of those things that is probably done very ineffectively in most organizations and by most managers and leaders that I work with. It isn't that they never celebrate, it's that they generally don't celebrate well and they don't celebrate often, which are both important aspects I'm going to talk about. But first, here's what drives my view of celebration and its role in creating results. It's a concept I call positive discontent. Simply put, it means be proud of what you've accomplished and let your team be proud, but don't let them become content. I think people tend towards one or the other. They're either really good at acknowledging their team's success, but over time, the team thinks, well, we're doing so good, there's no need to get better. Or what's even worse, because it demoralizes people, are the leaders who say, you know what, we don't ever give good feedback or praise or recognition. We want people to work really hard for it. A good enough never is. Well, that's ill-guided, because if people don't feel appreciated and if they don't think good enough never is, they don't even have a reason to try to be good. So you've got to be able to maintain those two polarities. You've got to be able to balance the two, to always recognize the good work that's being done, but to keep challenging people to see if they can become a little bit better, or to challenge them to see how good they can become. We should celebrate 2 things. We do the year-end party or the end of a big project celebration, but I think celebrating little wins is important too. That doesn't mean that we shut down the office or go off-site. It just means that maybe you bring in a box of donuts in the morning and you tell your team how much you appreciated the hard work they put in yesterday. Or maybe you celebrate an individual success, not just something that he or she might have accomplished on the job, but maybe they've accomplished something outside work, and you can really make them feel deservedly good by celebrating them in front of the team. Also, have your own celebrations. You can do little micro celebrations when you hit milestones in your own plan so that you have something to look forward to, whether it's a commitment to take off 2 hours in the afternoon to go see a movie or something different. Have a little incentive built in for yourself. And then finally, I think that the best place to celebrate is wherever you can, whether it's one-on-one in someone's office, whether it's at a team meeting in front of the group, whether it's an off-site at a bowling alley or somewhere fun. Get creative. I think that the thing that takes away from any good celebration is first insincerity. That should be an obvious one. But second is repetition. If you do the same celebrations over and over and they never vary, it becomes mundane and routine and kind of defeats the entire purpose. So make sure that you celebrate often, make sure you celebrate creatively, celebrate individual success and team success, not one or the other, but keep challenging people to keep getting better and find out how good they can be. I think those are the key ideas about celebrating.
I love it. And celebrating goes a long way to really building your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your motivation to keep going. I have an executive coaching client right now where every time she hits something on her list of goals or her action plans, her team does something right, she makes herself a note at the end of the day, and she's making them on colored Post-it notes, and she's putting these notes in a glass jar of hers so that at the end of the week, the month, the year, she watches that glass jar grow and become more and more colorful, and it's all the wins that she's had. And when you think about that, something that you may just do for yourself. You don't need to necessarily even do it at the office if you don't want people to see it, but just a way for you to acknowledge the things that you do in a day. Go back to the question I asked at the end of the last series. I talked about improvement over perfection. If you're one of those who focuses on what you didn't do right instead of what you did do well, you're right. It's all too common, Mark. I see it everywhere. Okay, before we get to the last part of the Get Started Now and give you some exercises to complete this series with, I just want to go back and just do a review and a reminder. The 4 principles that we talked about today are planning, accountability, reflection, and celebration. So I want you to lock those in and really be thinking about how you can take little bits and pieces of what we talked about today. How can you implement those in your world immediately? And here are some exercises for you to think about, for you to work on. What has worked best for you? When you think about planning, when you think about your own goal setting and your achievement, what has worked best in the past? What isn't working for you? What do you know doesn't work at all? And where can you improve? I think just taking all of this in and writing a simple list of things for yourself. What works, what doesn't work, and what do you know you need to do? Again, the great thing about podcasts is that they're recorded. So you have the ability to go back and re-listen. And if you wanted to re-listen to these and just do one a week, you'd be done in 1 month's time. And you can really find out, what have I implemented? Where do I still need to work? And so the last thing I would say is just write down a list of things that you're committed to doing. Make the decision. How will you change after having listened to this series? Please don't allow this series to just be something that you listen to on your drive. I'd really love to know that you sat down and you wrote down what are the things that you will take on very specifically outside of this podcast series. Mark, any final thoughts from you?
I have one final thought. This podcast has been designed to help people create more results. That's why we call it power planning, and the power planning is a means to an end. But results aren't the ultimate end. It would be my hope that anyone that's listened to this podcast would create more results, have more fun, and make more meaning in their life. It would be tragic to create more results and then feel empty at the end because the results didn't count for much or didn't truly matter in the big scheme of things. So I think the way that we make meaning is by infusing meaning into the work that we do and finding meaning in the work that we do that's already there. I think too often we forget that it's pretty easy to make money. And I'm not trying to give short shrift to the challenges that sometimes people face in a depressed economy. But in a free market system, it's easy to make money. It's far more harder to make meaning. So I hope that your results are towards a noble end, service to your family, to yourself, but importantly, service to others, so that as you do create more results, you'll have more fun, you'll enjoy the journey, not just the destination, and you'll be able to infuse more meaning into the good work that you do.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your insights, for your wisdom, and for sharing some really practical tips on how people can get those kind of results in their life. I will end on my end with a quote from Clinton Howell from his poem called Don't Quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you mustn't quit. So no matter where you're headed and the obstacles that you face, just keep going. You'll ultimately get that result if you remain persistent. I thank you for joining us for this 4-part power planning podcast. Again, you can go to marksanborn.com and leave a comment, or heatherchristie.com. Let us know what you think about our power planning podcast series. Let us know if you want more, if you've got other topics that you're interested in. And also just please leave us a note. Let us know what you did with this power planning podcast series. Until then, have a great day.